Customs and Border Protection Commissioner John Sanders is resigning. CBP says his resignation will be effective July 5th. Sanders' departure follows public outrage over reports that about 350 migrant children were found living in unsanitary conditions at a border protection facility in Texas last week. The U.S. government transferred 249 of them to Health and Human Services custody. The rest went to other Border Patrol facilities. 100 children who were transferred to those other facilities were sent back to the overcrowded center in Clint today. At the White House earlier, President Trump said detention centers are better now than they used to be.
I'm very concerned, and they're much better than they were under President Obama, by far.
Let's bring in Finn Gomez, Sean Sullivan, and Camilo Montoya Galvez. Finn is a CBS News White House producer. Sean is a CBSN political contributor and national politics reporter for The Washington Post. And Camilo is a reporter for CBSNews.com. Thank you all for being with us. Camilo, I want to start with you because you have been reporting on this detention facility in Clint, Texas. Overall, are conditions at migrant detainee facilities better than they had been under the Obama administration, as the president says?
Hey, Elaine. Yeah, so we obviously saw the president make that claim, but we don't know what information he's basing it on. What we do know is that immigrant advocates have denounced conditions in shelters for detained migrants in both Republican and Democratic administrations, including the Obama one. We've seen judges issued rulings against both the Obama and Trump administrations for conditions in migrant shelters and have accused both administrations of violating standards set forth by a court settlement known as the Flores Agreement that set the standards for the care of migrant children in U.S. custody. And remember, they don't usually allow journalists into these facilities, which, again, are not designed to take care of children like the one in Clint, Texas, which has caused this public uproar in recent days, especially for a protracted period of time. The border officers are supposed to transfer these migrant minors to the Department of Health and Human Services within 3 days. And the only reason lawyers were able to document these hard conditions at Clint was because of the Flores Agreement settlement that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So it's very hard to fact check, the president's claim because both administrations have been accused of violating this important agreement.
So it's such an important point, Camilo, this notion that, journalists are not allowed in there. So we're relying on accounts essentially from these lawyers who, under that court order, are given that access. But can you remind us of what it is that those attorneys are saying the conditions were actually like at the Clint facility?
Yeah, Elaine, the conditions they detailed were pretty deplorable. According to the attorneys who inspected this facility in Clint, Texas, just at the outskirts of El Paso, older children were taking care of younger children. Some young mothers had to wear clothes stained with breast milk, and children did not have access to soap or toothbrushes, and most had not even showered since they crossed the U.S.-Mexico border.
So I know, Camilo, you've reported that a group of 100 children were actually transferred back to Clint from other stations. Do you know why?
Right, so let's remember that after the revelations came to light by the attorneys, CBP, which oversees the Border Patrol officers which are detaining these children at Clint, faced a lot of pressure to move these kids out of the crowded and what one attorney called inhumane facility. And HHS confirmed today, the Department of Health and Human Services, that 249 of those of that group were taken into its custody, while the other children were transferred to other Border Patrol facilities in the area. Today, a CBP official told CBS News that 100 of those children were moved back to Clint, the station, but we don't know yet why they did so, and we're trying to get some answers. But until then, immigrant advocates will continue to denounce these conditions at Clint until we get some answers of why these 100 children were moved back there.
All right, Camilo, thank you very much. Sean, let me turn to you.
Inside this government-run facility in Texas, hundreds of migrant children were forced to sleep on the floor for weeks on end, without enough food or basic sanitation, according to lawyers who visited the site.
There is no access to soap. There's no access to toothbrushes. There's also a lice infestation.
The U.S. government disputes that account, but transferred most of the children out of the facility, only to bring more than 100 of them back because of a lack of space elsewhere.
We owe a basic duty of care to these individuals.
The entire system is at a breaking point. The former head of Immigration and Customs Enforcement blames the Trump administration's decision to detain asylum seekers instead of releasing them while they await hearings.
The overwhelming majority of these people pose neither a flight risk nor a public safety threat to the United States, and we shouldn't be spending billions of dollars detaining them, especially when we're not able to do it in a healthy and humane way.
I'm very concerned.
But the Trump administration blames a lack of funding for the overwhelmed system and poor conditions. The president is asking Congress to authorize billions in new spending that would include humanitarian aid, even as lawyers for the government have argued in court they don't actually need to provide basic necessities to detained migrants.
If you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Well, wouldn't everybody agree to that? Do you agree to that?
Well, I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe are.
Trump has so far refused to back down. His administration insists detention is a powerful deterrent.
You have these massive numbers of people trying to get into the United States.
Experts warn the president's policies may be having the opposite effect, fueling the surge in migrants and the crisis inside detention centers.
It's basically led people to think we better get there now because who knows what's going to happen next.
And it's clear tonight that the administration has no plans to back down from this hardline approach. The man they've announced as being chosen to lead Customs and Border Protection is a man who in interviews has said that he can tell which migrant children will grow up to be gang members just by looking them in the eyes. Donna, we're also hearing of plans to redistribute hundreds of airport security screeners to have them work.
Next tonight to the growing concerns over reports of deplorable conditions for hundreds of children living in government migrant holding facilities in the U.S. We're now hearing from a lawyer who visited one center in Texas and a doctor visiting another, describing it as, quote, torture, living in filth, kids, dirty clothes, no soap or toothbrushes. One day after delaying sweeping ICE raids in up to 10 cities, President Trump defending his administration. Here's ABC's Lana Zak.
These images show what inspectors call dangerous and unsanitary conditions at this migrant holding facility for adults in El Paso. But tonight, we're hearing from a doctor and a lawyer who interviewed children at two other Texas Customs and Border Protection centers. They say they witnessed inhumane scenes.
This felt worse than jail.
Dr. Dolly Sevier examined infants and children being held at the Ursula facility in McAllen, Texas, seen in these government handout images last year. Speaking exclusively to ABC News, she describes what she calls akin to torture. Fluorescent lights on 24/7. Many reported no access to basic sanitation and babies drinking from the same unwashed bottles for days.
The conditions at these facilities are placing them at increased risk for infection, disease, and death.
Attorney Warren Binford, who interviewed children at this facility in Clint, Texas, detailed equally dire conditions. Children left to care for one another.
They're sleeping on concrete blocks. There are open toilets in the room. There is no soap. These children are being held in a completely inappropriate facility.
Last week, federal judges scolded administration attorneys who argued that the conditions are adequate.
I find that inconceivable that the government would say that that is safe and sanitary.
Today, the vice president pressed if the Trump administration is doing enough for the children in its custody.
Aren't toothbrushes and blankets and medicine, basic conditions for kids, aren't they a part of how the United States of America, the Trump administration, treats children?
Well, of course they are, Jake. It's one of the reasons why we continue to call on Congress to give DHS, Customs and Border Protection, additional resources at the border.
The president had this to say.
We're doing a fantastic job under the circumstances.
We asked Customs and Border Protection for a response. They told us that they have limited resources, but that they work to provide the best possible care to everyone in their custody, especially children. And they say that all allegations of civil rights abuses or mistreatment are taken seriously. Tom?
Lana Zak with some of those shocking allegations tonight. Lana, thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
The House approved emergency funding overnight to address the humanitarian crisis at the border. Now, this follows another Homeland Security shakeup. Mark Morgan, acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, will take over as acting chief of Customs and Border Protection next month, after John Sanders resigned unexpectedly yesterday. As head of ICE, Morgan has pushed for nationwide raids on undocumented migrant families. Jeff Begay spoke with him yesterday before the shakeup. Jeff is outside the ICE headquarters in Washington. I know, Jeff, you wish that news would have broken before you did this interview. But what did Morgan have to say about conditions at the facilities?
Well, good morning, Gail. Mark Morgan denies that there are systemic problems inside these border detention facilities. However, he did admit that migrant children should not be held there.
Border Patrol is not a place for the kids. I think every American can agree with that. They are overcrowded. Those Border Patrol stations are not designed for kids.
ICE has taken in more than 400,000 migrants so far this year, which has overwhelmed U.S. border facilities. About 1,000 unaccompanied migrant children are currently in CBP custody. Would you want your family there?
I would never want my family to be detained.
Any family you know in a facility like that?
Just like I don't think anybody would want any of their family members being in a police station. So the best way to not to be in that detention facility is don't come to our country illegally.
Morgan disputes aspects of a recent DHS Inspector General's report, which cites egregious violations at some detention facilities.
I just don't agree that it's egregious conditions like a systemic problem.
What word would you use?
I would say that there are always challenges. I welcome non-governmental organizations to come in and do a check and balance. We should always try to get better.
It's estimated that
President Trump yesterday said that he is very concerned about poor border facility conditions, once again claiming without evidence that it's an improvement from his predecessor.
Just remember, we are treating them and doing a much better job than the Obama administration.
But it was because of President Trump's zero-tolerance policy last year that thousands of migrant children were systematically separated from their parents. And now, amid an unprecedented surge of migrants, DHS and CBP have been without a permanent leader for more than 2 months. For ICE, it's been nearly 2.5 years. Yet the Trump administration blames deplorable detention center conditions on a lack of money from Congress.
Mexico is doing much more for us than, frankly, the Democrats in Congress.
But as we mentioned last night, House Democrats passed a $4.5 billion aid package that includes money for food, water, sanitary items, and services for migrants. The bill also contains, though, restrictions on how that money is spent and includes no funding for the border wall. The White House says President Trump will veto that bill. Meanwhile, the Republicans in the Senate are working on their own version of a $4.5 billion aid bill with fewer restrictions, though. Tony.
Jeff Begay's for us. Jeff, thank you very much.
Your administration, you're not doing the recreation, you're not even schooling these kids anymore. You've gotten rid of all that stuff.
We're doing a fantastic job under the circumstances. The Democrats aren't even approving giving us money.
We're doing a lot with what the Congress has given us. But again, Congress refused to increase the bed space in the last appropriations bill.
Basically, what we saw are dirty children who are malnourished, who are being severely neglected. They are being kept in inhumane conditions. They are essentially being warehoused, as many as 300 children in a cell with almost no adult supervision. We have children caring for other young children. The children are hardly being fed anything nutritious, and they are being medically neglected. We're seeing a flu outbreak, and we're also seeing a lice infestation. We have children sleeping on the floor. It's the worst conditions I've ever witnessed in several years of doing these inspections.
That, you know, if you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Well, wouldn't everybody agree to that? Do you agree to that?
Well, I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe are a part.
But this is the wealthiest nation in the world. We have money to give toothpaste and soap and blankets to these kids in this facility in El Paso County right now.
Of course we do.
So why aren't we?
My point is, it's all a part of the appropriations process. Congress needs to provide additional support to deal with the crisis at our southern border. But we've got to get to the root causes. We've got to close the loopholes.
Where is the money? You know what?
The Democrats are holding up the humanitarian aid.
But why let the political debate hurt these
Chuck,
children?
we
They
could-
could be impacted for years.
If the Democrats would change the asylum laws and the loopholes, which they refuse to do because they think it's good politics, everything would be solved immediately. But they refuse to do it.
First, the left invites the migrants in, and they cross the border in record numbers. Then they complain loudly about the detention centres, call them concentration camps. While now progressives object to emergency aid to take care of the migrants that they invited in. They don't want to give President Trump any kind of win. Oh, please, come on. Their contempt for the president is hurting young children. The Democrats are engaged in political posturing, wrapped in hypocrisy. They pose as the great humanitarians while using children for what they think is their political advantage. At issue is a $4.5 billion aid package designed to improve conditions for children detained at the border. I don't know if it will pass, but the far left just hates it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, quote, "We need to stop funding the detention of children under any and all circumstances." That's a classic open border policy. Let them all in, and then blame America, blame President Trump for the chaos that results. Fact, 50,000 minors have crossed the border since November last year. 28% of them had no DNA connection to the adults they traveled with. They were renter kids used to get into the country. And the left blames Trump. I'll make a prediction. At the Democrat debates this week, the candidates will make a lot of noise about the children. If they really wanted to help, they'd stop encouraging the flood. They'd do something about the asylum laws, which are clearly being gamed. And they should provide the money to take care of the children they are using in their vindictive hate Trump campaign. There's no excuse for that.